Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and even though the M2 MacBook Air was the big showstopper at Apple's WWDC event, Apple said we would have to wait until next month to be able to order one of these brand new M2 MacBook Airs. However, if you want the future of the M2 chip this month, well, Apple just had another surprise because the MacBook Air won't be the first laptop on the market with the M2 chip. It will actually be the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which was announced alongside the M2 MacBook Air, with Apple now setting the official pre-order date for the M2 MacBook Pro on June 17th. This Friday if you're watching this video early, and it will officially be on sale on Friday, June 24th. So with the release of this 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro now imminent, I wanted to discuss some recommendations I would have for this MacBook and whether or not you should actually buy it. And I'm really interested to hear your take on this in the comments below. Considering the last video I released on the M2 MacBook Pro, I basically told people not to buy it over the Air. I thought the Air was just a more interesting laptop, and I really didn't see the reason to go for the M2 MacBook Pro. But I had a lot of people in the comments telling me why you preferred or why you're actually picking the 13-inch MacBook Pro over the Air. So let me know, do you plan on pre-ordering this MacBook Pro this Friday, or are you gonna wait for the new M2 MacBook Air? And why are you specifically picking this laptop over the MacBook Air? All right, so let's address the elephant in the room. The M2 MacBook Pro, it's not exciting. It's literally the same exact M1 MacBook Pro design with almost nothing changed about it, except that it has the new M2 chip, which is exciting, but the design itself is not. So yes, it does not get the bigger redesign of the MacBook Air, it does not have a new 13.6-inch display with the reduced bezels, and it does not receive any body changes. This 13-inch MacBook Pro design is still pretty much the same exact design that came out in 2016, complete with a touch bar. So over 6 years of this design. Not only that, but it also lacks a lot of the internal upgrades of the MacBook Air, so it still has the older 720p webcam system, and it still has the older stereo speaker pair, and misses out on the new 4-speaker system. It will also just come with 2 Thunderbolt ports, and lacks the new MagSafe charging port that the Air just got. Now, yes, for my personal taste, I told most people you should go for the M2 MacBook Air, and I still stand by that advice. I think it is the better all-around laptop for most people, has a new design, has more features, and it's really the same price as the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and honestly, most people would be fine with that lower configuration, which is actually $100 less than this M2 MacBook Pro. So when I keep saying I recommend it over it, I think that most users will get a better device by going for the MacBook Air. However, I am not saying there's zero reasons to go for the M2 MacBook Pro. There are legitimate and practical use cases for some users that would make them choose this over the Air, and it would be a better choice for them. The first reason is, well, you don't have to wait too much longer. When Apple first announced these laptops alongside each other, I thought they would go on sale at the exact same time. A lot of you have been waiting for a new MacBook to be announced since the M1, which means that you have been waiting for this new M2 chip for over 18 months. And as someone that hates waiting for a new product, I know that wait can be downright unbearable. If you really want a laptop with just an M2 chip, and you don't mind missing out on the other features or the new design, well, this new M2 MacBook Pro is going to be awfully tempting of an option for you when it goes up on pre-order by the end of this week. It's also probably a lot less likely to be supply constrained because it uses an older design. Listen, game consoles, phones, computers, everything in the tech sector seems to be pretty hard to get right now, and because this M2 MacBook Pro uses that older body, I imagine it is easier to manufacture and won't face the harsher supply chain constraints that we have seen on newer Macs, meaning even if you miss the pre-order, in all likelihood, you will probably still be able to get one pretty soon. And I don't know if I can say the same about the new design for the M2 MacBook Air. I actually expect that one to be heavily supply constrained, especially after what we've seen with the recent MacBook Pro releases. To not be unfair to the M2 MacBook Pro, there are advantages for this MacBook over the older generation and the new M2 MacBook Air. The first and most obvious is that it has a fan to help with the sustained performance, which is something that is better over the Air, and this will prevent thermal throttling. For normal everyday use or even short bursts of performative tasks, the fan likely won't make a difference, but if you're let's say a video editor rendering out a project or exporting a video, the fan is going to make sure the M2 chip runs at full speed, making those tasks faster. And that can go for a wide array of different work situations. So if you're a developer, photographer, using like photo editing, 3D modeling, all that stuff, anything that is performative you're doing for a long period of time, the fan will help with performance. There's also two bigger additions to the M2 chip itself that will actually make this entry-level MacBook Pro more pro. That is, first of all, the new maximum memory spec, which goes up to 24 gigabytes of memory, which will make this a very competent machine for pro tasks that require more memory. And then the M2 MacBook Pro is also an even better laptop if you are planning on using it for video editing. High five to all my video editors out there, yeah. And that big upgrade is the new media engine on the M2 chip. This was one of the additions to the M1 Pro chips and above that made them so great at handling video projects. Apple claims the M2 supports ProRes encode and decode, so you can play and edit up to 11 streams of 4K ProRes video and up to 2 streams of 8K ProRes video, and it converts to ProRes up to 3 times faster than before. A $1,300 laptop handling that many streams of 4K and even being able to handle 8K is pretty insane. So if you're a pro on a budget, there is a strong argument to be made that going for the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro would be a better choice over the fancy new design of the MacBook Air. It actually might end up being a more practical choice. There's also other practical benefits to getting this MacBook Pro. First of all, the base model comes with the full M2 chip with its full 10-core GPU, and like I mentioned before, even though the M2 Air appears cheaper, if you wanted to upgrade it to the same specification, it would actually be the same price as this MacBook Pro. Furthermore, the 13-inch MacBook Pro has slightly longer battery life, with Apple giving it a 20-hour rating compared to the Air's 18-hour rating. All right, so if you actually made it to this part of the video, if you didn't drop off yet, I think you have a good idea on if you're actually going to buy this MacBook. If you still have more questions, don't be afraid to ask below. Again, I will try my best to answer them, but let's talk about some configurations that I recommend. First of all, let's look at that base model. $1,300 is really tempting, but I really feel like if you're an average user and you don't plan on using this for like pro tasks, well, honestly, I still hold by that my recommendation of the M2 MacBook Air would be the better laptop choice for you, since you aren't likely to be utilizing this laptop for pro workflows, which usually have a need for higher memory. Maybe if you want to prevent thermal throttling, or you really like the older design, shout out to all my Touch Bar fans out there, then yes, I guess the base model could work for you. But for most people looking at a pro laptop, I would recommend going for the 16 gigabyte configuration. This is a comfortable memory size that will allow you to push the MacBook Pro more with having multiple apps open at once with no slowdowns, and give you smoother performance when using bigger applications like Final Cut, Premiere, Affinity Photo, and Photoshop. What about storage? Well, it's a very personal choice, as I have found out. Personally, I always like a little bit more storage, and I'm willing to spend more money for more internal storage. I hate running out of space on my laptop, and I think the 256 gigabyte configuration is a little sparse, so I would feel more comfortable with the 512 gigabyte option. But I understand Apple's storage prices are very high, and the more you upgrade it, the more you realize that going for an entry-level product like the M2 MacBook Pro doesn't look as good when you're looking at some of the higher-end MacBook Pro specifications. So if you don't feel comfortable paying those higher storage prices, I would recommend getting an external SSD to store big files on. You can usually get 1 terabyte of fast flash storage for way less than the 512 gigabyte upgrade on these new MacBooks. So if you want storage at a cheaper price, don't forget you can attach very fast external storage to these devices now. I will leave a link to some of my favorites down in the description below. Furthermore, the ports are very limited on the M2 MacBook Pro, and I'm sure you'd want a port situation that looks more like the 14-inch MacBook Pro with ports like HDMI or an SD card reader. Well, all hope is not lost. Even though the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro does not come with these ports, there are a variety of Thunderbolt adapters that can give you these ports, and even more ports than the 14-inch MacBook Pro has. So you can get things like a micro SD card reader and even USB-A ports. Again, I will leave links to some of my favorites down below. All right, what about this new 24GB configuration option? This is a brand new configuration that I have not had any experience with, but it is just more memory, so I imagine it would be closer to an experience of working with something like 32GB of memory. Now, this is an option for people that know that they need a lot of memory. This is if you have a lot of apps open at once, you have a ton of browser tabs open, or you're using multiple pro applications at once, and you want to be able to take advantage of this increased memory. Just be careful though, because as you spec this out, you start to run up against the price of an entry-level 14-inch MacBook Pro, which could also be enticing, but that does not come with more memory. You'd have to spec that out again, so I understand if you wanted to pick this up with the 24GB of memory. If you're on a budget, the 24GB option is going to be a nice configuration that can really help you push the limits of these new entry-level MacBooks, and I think it's a nice addition overall just to the M2 lineup in general. I used to think the 16GB of max memory was a pretty big weakness for these computers, and while I think everyone would prefer a 32GB option, I do have to be honest that I was not expecting more memory for this year, so 24GB of memory, I'm very happy with that. And if you're on a budget and you need more memory than 16GB, well, these are obviously going to be very easy recommendations to make. All right, hopefully this buying advice was helpful. I'm sorry if it sounded generic, but I'm trying to explain it to the widest audience possible. So if you have a more detailed question that I really couldn't answer with a generic video like this, well, ask it down in the comments below. Again, I will try my best to answer it if I can. All right. Don't forget, MacBooks go on sale this Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you are sure you want one, my biggest advice of all is to pre-order one as soon as possible to make sure you get it on release day, which will be Friday, June 24th. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Really hope this video helped you out, and hopefully I will see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone. Peace.